So I'm here with my friend Nick, who I've known for over 20 years, and he's been watching some of my nutrition content that I've been putting out on social media. And he's got some questions about a few things that have come up. So he wanted to ask me them. So we thought we'd record it and share our conversation. So hopefully other people can learn from it.
Cool. My bit, James, is watching your content, thoroughly enjoy it. And I'm not going to claim that I understand it all. And my thinking when I spoke to you was, I'm not the only one. So I've got a few questions and I thought, let me just put them to you and then see what comes up. Now, I know that once you've explained it, if I don't understand it, I want to be the kind of the idiot's guide. Because there's bits here I do not understand.
Okay, you'd be very good at that, being an idiot.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I love you too. So my first question, sugars.
Okay. Are you calling me sugar, or is it a bit of a come on there? Or
come on. I always call you sugar. So sugars, for me, and I'm quite aware that I'm exposing myself to be completely thick here in this, and I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Because this isn't my area. So you've got brown sugar, you've got white sugar, and you've got sugars in fruits.
Okay.
So a couple of part question is, what's the difference?
Okay.
And do they interact with the body different? Because if I'm being told on social media, avoid sugars, keep away from sugar, keep away from sugar. Next thing I hear is that fruit is high in sugar. So should I not eat fruit?
Okay.
That's the confusion.
Okay. So I know you want me to keep things simple, but I'm going to have to touch a little bit of science
So
here.
you're not touching me. We're good.
Yeah, but it's just in order to give some perspective. Okay. The term sugar is a generic term for any sort of simple carbohydrate, really. Okay. So you've got protein, fats, and carbohydrates. And carbohydrates in nature it's a structural thing. And they can be metabolized. Now, certain animals can metabolize different types of carbohydrates.
Yep.
The ones humans can't metabolize, we generically call fiber. Okay, so fiber is just carbohydrates that we can't digest. Now, generally speaking, fiber are all long-chain carbohydrates. As an example of a long-chain carbohydrate that humans do have the digestive system themselves to digest and absorb is starch. That's a long chain. Now that's called a polysaccharide. You may have heard the term.
I've heard the term. Don't know what it is. But
so that's So that's pause that lot.
Yep.
So the shorter saccharides are mono and disaccharides.
Okay.
So mono for one, di for two. So they are sugars. They're either mono or disaccharides. So let me break that down a bit further. Glucose, which is the most abundant in the body because it's the metabolic fuel. Ultimately, it's the one that's used for fuel by the body. Ultimately, everything is broken down into glucose for use, whether it's fat, whether it's protein, whether it's starch, whether it's longer chain carbohydrates, all broken down to glucose in the blood. Okay. Glucose is a monosaccharide. Another monosaccharide is fructose, which is the fruit sugar. Okay. And there's another. Let me talk about some disaccharides because it's relevant. Okay. So you've got lactose, which is milk sugar. That is a disaccharide of one glucose molecule and another one called galactose. Okay. You don't have to worry about that, but it's still technically a sugar. Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Are you still with me?
Parts of it, but we'll come back.
Okay. And then another example would be sucrose, which is we call table sugar.
Yep.
Okay, the white stuff generally, or the brown stuff, which we'll talk about in a moment. And that is a disaccharide of one glucose and one fructose molecule. Okay. Now, obviously, people have been having sugars in their diet since, there's been people. And, animals have been having sugars since we were just bacteria in doing our stuff as bacteria. Okay.
Yeah.
It was only, I'm trying to know history here, it's a couple of hundred years ago, maybe in the early 18th century, that we started extracting sugars from certain foods. And that's, don't want to go down the slave trade thing, but there's an issue there.
Yeah.
And then it was sent over to European wealthy and was seen as a delicacy. Okay. And this was sugar. Now it was from cane predominantly, I think, in the early stages, or at least other tropical plants.
Yep.
And it was sucrose. Didn't know that at the time. Just sucrose. It was a delicacy. So much of a delicacy, actually, that the wealthy, who used to, obviously, sugar's bad for your teeth, would rot your teeth. So a bit of tooth decay was seen as a good thing. So much so that in early Victorian days, some women would put some sort of acid on their teeth just to break it down to make them look like there was decay and brown, because that was seen as a sign of wealth.
Okay.
It's a little side note there. Well, we're completely off
Interesting.
topic.
Yeah.
Obviously now we see people with shitty teeth, and it's not a good thing at all.
That's why I'm not smiling.
So that's broadly what sugars are. Okay. Now, fructose is just found in fruit. So this is where it comes in. Now, how are they treated differently in the body? Yes, they are. Now, obviously, I've mentioned sucrose is one glucose and one fructose. They are metabolized differently, and fructose does go through a different pathway. Don't worry, I won't go into too much detail about that because I don't think it's relevant. Mm-hmm. So it does. Both of them affect insulin. Now, insulin is a hormone that's released by the pancreas that causes that lowers blood sugar level, and so when diabetics who have exogenous insulin, i.e., inject insulin, have too much, they can go into hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar level. When blood sugar level raises too high, that can be a problem for a multitude of other reasons that I won't go off topic about. Yeah. But insulin is a very dominant hormone. Yeah. It has a more dominant role than most other hormones. It's also very anabolic. It's also responsible for putting sugars into fats, which we store. It's responsible for proteins into muscle, which we store, and we need as a metabolic fuel or for muscle growth. So it's a very dominant hormone. Okay. But when it goes wrong, is when we've got problems. Yeah. And then, so this is where people habitually having too much sugar in their diet, and not just sugar, but having too much stress in their life, not enough physical activity. The modern lifestyle, for instance, can cause the blood sugar level to be slightly habitually high, which causes the blood insulin level to be slightly habitually high. Yeah. Which is high insulin, which is associated with a lot of problems. Okay. So there's so much more could be said on that. Some of it won't be on my own knowledge, but that's broadly speaking what happens. So now let's bring this back down to hopefully your question. Okay. So all the sugars, whether it's brown, white, demerara, whatever the other ones are, the role in the body is all the same. Okay. But it comes from different, whether it's from beet or whether it's from cane, it's still sucrose. It's just a beet, obviously, is grown in Northern Europe, very big in the UK. So it's obviously cheaper for us in some circumstances, but it's such a cheap commodity now. It's not anything for the wealthy. Yeah. Everybody has sugar. Yeah. Whether people call it coconut sugar or some other sort of sugar, it's still just sucrose. Okay. Now, so let's answer your question about fruit. Yeah. Fruit does contain sugar, but have you ever met anybody who got fat from eating fruit? No, it's not a thing, right? No. And some people, carrots compared to other vegetables.
Toffee apples.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. But I was going to say, the jokes maybe lose my line of thought there.
Fruit. Never seen anybody.
Get fat from eating fruit. So whilst a diabetic who has got problems, whether it's type 1 or type 2, who has got problems controlling their insulin level, fruit could affect their insulin level in too high amounts. So they have to moderate the amount of fruit they have in one go. Okay. But it won't, but it's not the fruit that's caused that or has been associated with it. Absolutely not. Right. It's just they have to maybe moderate it. So fruit does contain sugar, but what's also special about fruit, it's not just a load of sugar. It's the fiber there, which is other forms of carbohydrate. Yeah. And the fiber there, the matrix, which is the format that the molecules are in as well, all mean that it's treated very differently to just sugar, which has been extracted. So it's unnatural to extract sugar. That's where I'm going with this. Yeah. So whatever format it's in, it's been unnaturally extracted, but then it's added to other foods, right? Whether they're processed or just a bit of extra. And we have way too much of it. So the problem with sugar is we have too much of it. Yeah. It's not fruit. If you're a diabetic and fruit is part of your diet, have a little bit, but don't have too much in any one go. And if you do have it with a meal, so then there's more fiber in the matrix of that meal too. Yeah.
Okay. So on that then, so if I'm sitting here eating just sugar, from what you said, that's then going to mess with my insulin level.
Yeah.
which is a dominant hormone, or it can.
So if you habitually have a lot of sugar, like one meal, of course you're going to, your blood insulin is going to go up, and that's okay.
Yeah, but the habitual part, then it can mess with. Basically, it can bring on diabetes. Or is that wrong?
It's part of the equation that could be associated with it. I'm speaking in a very nuanced way. There's so much more going on. And we'd be talking about type 2 diabetes here.
So now, if I pause that for a second, now, if I'm not eating this this sugar that we've extracted and I'm just eating fruit, then I'm not going to run into the same problems?
I wouldn't say yes or no, because the human body's not like that. The human body's highly complex. There's so much else going on in the etiology of diabetes.
Love that.
Exercise as well, lack of physical activity. It's the modern lifestyle, and there's fats come into play in the etiology as well. Stress comes into play, cortisol, and obviously stress is more in your partly in your field, and it's stress we create ourselves as well as stress we can't control.
Yeah.
So there's so much more nuance. So you won't just, the problem we have, and I've got a bee in my bonnet about some of these influencers, who talk absolute shite. One rule of thumb is if anybody is demonizing any particular food, whether it be Mars bars or sticks of celery or fruit, they are very likely not giving you good information.
Love that.
Okay? Because, and there's a big thing at the moment with fruit. People are demonizing fruit and then people are listening to them. Mm-hmm. Fruit has got vitamins and minerals, packed with vitamins and minerals, which we need. And people don't have enough of them. I would never discourage anyone from eating fruit, even though it's demonized by some. I mean, people have been harping about it. It's not just a recent social media thing, like some people have objected to fruit because it's got sugar in it. Well, so fucking what? Right? It's, there's no one food you shouldn't have anyway, whether it be a Mars bar or waffles or anything. Right? Yep. But fruit is definitely not one of those.
Yeah.
So if there's issues with controlling your blood sugar, like you're type 2 diabetic or type 1 diabetic, or you've even got pre-diabetes or metabolic syndrome or something, then let's be cautious on how much you have in one go and only have it with a meal, etc.
Yeah.
It's when sugar's extracted from food that it becomes an issue. And even then, I'm not discouraging anyone from having any sugar. I'm just saying don't have too much of it. Right? Don't demonize individual foods, and don't listen to people who do choose to demonize individual foods. I'm going to point to the camera for this one.
Yeah.
Don't listen to people who demonize individual foods. They're very likely not giving you the whole story. Nutrition is highly nuanced and highly complex.
So can I just say, the one thing I've taken from this conversation in a real genuine sense is it's so much more complex than what I'm hearing on social media. So much more complex. I'm listening to people say, cut out sugar. Full stop, underlined, game over. What? Okay. So then I've gone for fruit and I'm like, now I know that there's sugar in here. But now I didn't know that this is my layman's term. It's a different process, completely different process, which is going to bring me on to something else in a minute. But it's the complexity of all of this. So when I'm on there and I'm hearing, and I don't want to take you down a rabbit hole, but when I'm hearing there's this diet, there's this diet, there's that diet, there's that. And I'm thinking, what is all of this? I don't understand all of this. Because I've got the privilege of you and I sitting down like this anyway, for me, I get to ask a question. And from what I'm hearing is just be balanced. Be balanced in everything.
Yeah.
So when I'm hearing, I'll be honest, I fell for it. When I'm hearing social media influencers, I don't really know what that means, if I'm honest.
I know.
But when I'm hearing that and I'm thinking, okay, well, he looks fantastic and he's saying don't eat sugar. I want to look like that, so I won't eat sugar. And I think, and I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm deliberately sounding thick because I am in this area, but my bit here is the complexity of it. It's the complexity of everything that's going on here with this sugar. I've got questions like this about fats.
Okay, let's pause. Let me come back on that. So let's just round that up. I think we can round up the sugar thing. So firstly, like I've said, anyone who's demonizing a particular food and saying another thing is an influencer or a communicator who talks in absolutes says, don't have that, cut this out, don't ever have it, it'll kill you, it'll raise insulin, common little word they like to do, or causes inflammation, another little common term they use, which may be true, but they don't put any substance behind it, they don't quantify it. That's the problem. So anyone who talks in absolutes is very likely not someone you should be listening to. So if you've been hearing these, they're the sort of people I would suggest, even if a bunch of their information they give is probably useful and good, I would probably listen to others. Because there are some really good influencers. Again, I don't know what the term means, but it's some popularly used term, so we'll stick with it. That gives some really good information. Well, I'm not going to name the good or the bad, I don't think, at the moment, because if I'm naming credible influencers, I should probably be naming the not so credible ones. And it's not something I want to get into.
Yeah.
Okay. But you shouldn't need to. If you use the tips I give you,
absolutely.
Like there's two of them there. If they've demonized particular foods or they talk in absolutes, they are two clues for someone who's very likely not giving you good information. You've got something to say about fats?
Fats. So it's very similar. It's very similar to the sugars, as in saturated fats.
Okay.
Trans fats.
Yeah.
Essential fats.
Okay.
What are these things?
So I'm going to, again, fats is an interesting topic. I'll try and keep it simple. I'm going to have to do a little bit of basic chemistry here. Don't worry, not going to be bogged down with chemical formulas, but we need to just talk about a bit of the chemistry of fats.
Okay.
So broadly speaking, from a generalization use perspective, we'll put them into different categories, and then I'll tell you how the chemistry fits in.
Okay.
So we've got saturated fats. We've got monounsaturated fats. We've got omega-3 polyunsaturates. We've got omega-6 polyunsaturates. And we've got MCTs. Don't worry, I'll quantify it. And we've got trans fats. Okay. Let's keep those 6 just for conversational purposes.
Okay.
Okay. Fats are more or less present in nature and in the body at certain times in the body. Are called triglycerides, which is a backbone of something called glycerol and 3 fatty acids tri. Okay. Now that's kind of relevant because it'll for a bit later on. Just hold that thought.
Okay.
Now the fatty acids themselves are structured differently. Okay. So a saturated fat has no double bonds in its structure.
Okay.
It's completely saturated.
Okay.
You don't have to know what that means. I won't go into too much of the chemistry. But it's got no double bonds. A monounsaturated fat has, in one part on the structure, has a double bond. Just one. Monounsaturated. Okay. A poly has 2 or more along there. Okay.
Yep.
Now the position, this is where I'll confuse myself if I start talking about this. Is where I get lost unless I'm actually looking at a textbook. I understand when I'm looking at a textbook, but it loses me when I try and do it from memory, so I'm not going to go there. But the position of the first double bond and how many double bonds it is how it's written as an abbreviation.
Okay.
Okay. Don't do any more than that. Okay. So there's omega-3s and there's omega-6s, but let's just hold that thought at the moment. So saturated fat are things, a common one is called palmitic acid. Okay, which is a very common found in animal and some plant forms. It's very common in the diet as a saturated
Never
fat.
Heard of it.
Okay. You don't need to know. I'm just giving an example. Because let's talk about a monounsaturated. There's palmitoleic acid, which has got 1 double bond. Okay. So it's the same length as palmitic, but it's got 1 double bond in it. Okay. So its body treats it different. Okay. Now, and another very common monounsaturated is oleic acid, which is abundant in some oils like olive oil and rapeseed oil or canola oil, whatever you call it, same thing, words used interchangeably. And then let's talk about polyunsaturates. Have got more than 1 double bond. So you mentioned the term essential fats. Okay, what does it fit in? Well, there's only 2 fatty acids in nature that are essential to humans, completely essential to humans. Okay. One of them is called alpha-linolenic acid.
Wow.
Okay, which is people call ALA abbreviation.
Nice.
And that is an omega-3.
Okay.
And the other one is linoleic acid, very similar sounding, alpha-linolenic, and then there's linoleic acid, which is an omega-6. Okay?
Okay.
I'm going to come back to these in a moment, okay? It's important. No, I'm going to talk about them now. That's a good way. So we all hear that omega-3s are good for us, and there's a bit of a thing at the moment that people are saying we need to not have omega-6s in our diet. There's a bit of a demonization, here I go again on one of my rants, about the seed oils at the moment. A lot of these pseudo-influencers, these unqualified pseudo-experts, are demonizing seed oils. They're saying seed oils are bad for you, should be cutting them out. This is really, really not good advice, and it's based on something, which I can talk about as a side note, but it's not based on good evidence. Let me explain why. So firstly, people are saying, a lot of these guys are saying, don't have linoleic acid. Don't have linoleic acid? What, you want me to die?
Right, okay.
It's to say you will die without it.
Okay.
It's required for the conversion to other omega-6 fatty acids that have functions in the body, some of which we call semi-essential, because whilst we can create them from linoleic acid, technically, we don't create them enough. So arachidonic acid is an example of this one. Another one is gamma-linolenic acid. Okay, wow. I know it's confusing.
Yeah, very.
Don't have to worry about the terms, but I'm just trying to emphasize the fact there that linoleic acid is essential and you need a reasonable amount of it.
Right, okay.
Are we having too many omega-6s in our diet? Okay, maybe we can talk about that in a moment. Okay. But and so omega-6s, where are they found? A lot of them in seeds and nuts and a lot of plant foods, and to some degree, some animal foods. Okay. Omega-3s, you always hear everyone says have loads of omega-3s, they're good for you. Fish oils come in here. Okay. Now, fish oils are rich in two semi-essential omega-3s. Okay. Meaning that we can create them in the human body. Now, the two of these are EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, I think. Anyway, I can always say them normally, but when you're on camera, suddenly the names. Anyway, I'm just showing off trying to get the names and actually failing dismally there. But the two semi-essential fatty acids that have come from fish are EPA and DHA. Now, we're not consuming enough of these.
Right.
Okay. There's a lot of evidence to show we're not consuming enough. Now, you can create them from ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, the one that is essential. They can be synthesized in the body from ALA, but the conversion level is actually really quite low.
Right.
It's been as low as like 2% for DHA. And I'm not going to talk too much about this but there's massive underconsuming, especially in pregnancy at the moment. Women are not consuming enough omega-3s. So you either have loads of ALA to make sure there's enough, especially DHA produced, or there should be having or from oily fish or supplementation with DHA. Now, what about if you're vegan? You don't want oily fish, which I completely get. You can get the fish oils from algae oil, because where do the fish get them from? The algae that they eat.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're cutting out the middle man, so to speak, by getting EPA and DHA. But a note here, we should be consuming more EPA or DHA, and if we're not, we should be consuming huge amounts of ALA. Okay. So I think a lot of these pseudo-influencers would probably agree with me on that. Okay. Not that I need them to agree with me or not, because I don't really care what they think. But what I'm trying to say is there's no conflict there.
Yeah.
People generally behind need, I think they're underestimating. I think there is a massive, especially in pregnancy. I believe there's good evidence that lack of DHA, especially in pregnancy in children, even to some degree in adult, is part of the mental health crisis at the moment. There's a whole rabbit hole we could go down there, right? On a bigger conversation with some really good evidence behind it. So the problem is, it's been suggested that the ratio between omega-3s and omega-6s in our diet is wrong. We're having too many omega-6s for the omega-3s. Okay. And this is partly due to two things. Back in the 1970s, which, when you were about 40, right, you'd go down your fish and chip shop and you would cook the fish and chips in lard, which lard is animal fat, so it's largely saturated fat. Okay. Then, of course, the 90s and noughties came along and the fish and chip shop owners started putting it in cheap vegetable oils, which are omega-6, which are seed oils.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when it was lard, it's saturated fat. Now, you cannot oxidize saturated fats. The chemistry won't allow that to happen.
Yep.
Now, part of the atherogenic process, the heart disease process, is where the fats in your blood stick to the wall.
Mm-hmm.
They only become sticky when they get oxidized.
Right.
So if you're already consuming fats which are oxidized, that's a problem.
Okay.
It's not a good thing.
Okay.
Now you can perhaps see where I'm going with this. The polyunsaturated omega-6 rich vegetable oils are very easy to oxidize.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're having a load of fried fruit junk, not demonizing fish and chips here, which I enjoy fish and chips as much as anyone, but if you're having too much of those oxidized omega-3s, that's not good for you.
Right.
And because vegetable oils are in everything these days, way too much, especially the junk foods that we shouldn't be eating too much of, people are over-consuming the omega-6s. So this is where I think the demonization of seed oils is coming from.
Okay.
We are over-consuming these omega-6s in relative and consuming too little of the omega-3s. So this is where I think it's coming from. But they're getting it wrong. They're saying we shouldn't be having seed oils at all. Whereas actually, you look at the evidence that seed oil consumption relative to the amount of saturated fats is actually improves health markers and health outcomes.
Wow,
so you look
at
the markers can be easily assessed, they're objective markers,
mm-hmm.
certain blood cholesterol levels, for instance, and the types of cholesterol. And if we look at disease outcomes, there's a lot of research on this. Now, there was one study, I think it was done in the 60s, and not putting anything on the date at the time here, that's irrelevant, but it was done at a time where there was a lot of people that left the trial during the trial. So the data that it produced wasn't very good. And it's from that I think a lot of these pseudo-influencers, they're not interpreting the studies properly, and they're getting this information that seed oils aren't good for you, basically from this one study, which was quite a big study, granted, but there's a lot of people left it.
Mm-hmm.
Incidentally, if you want to learn more about this, I've written an article on my Substack called The Exoneration of Seed Oils, where about 4,000 words, don't want to put you off, but went into real detail about the studies of this and why seed oils are not just not bad for you, but are actually good for you relative to other fats. Mm-hmm. So just to summarize that bit there before we talk about the last two, which I haven't summarized yet, is the main problem is that we're consuming too little omega-3s and too much of the wrong sort of omega-6s, okay? And when I say the wrong sort, it's not where they're coming from, the wrong sort. It's not from the seeds or the vegetables they're coming from. It's how they're treated in the cooking or processing process, where they've become oxidized. Okay. That's the problem. And this is really important, because if you see, some people are off-put if they see sunflower oil as an ingredient. Well, it depends what the food is. It's probably not so good if the food is junk food anyway, which is a multitude of other reasons that you shouldn't be having that food. Yeah. Too much of that food. Don't want to be demonizing individual foods, do you, James? Okay. And so, and people not having enough omega-3s in the diet. So I'm not going to bang on too much about the ratio, because there's been a lot of work done on the ratio of them, and people saying you should be having at least 4 to 1 or 2 to 1 at the 6s to 3s. And people, whereas a lot of diets actually are more than 15 to 20 to 1. So there probably is an issue there. Right. But let's keep it simple. Everybody wants to go out and measuring the ratio of different bloody fatty acids. Exactly. They just want simple thing. So here's the simple answer. Eat the right sorts of omega-6s. Seed oils are fine. Nuts, seeds, plenty. Just don't worry too much about them. But do focus on trying to get more omega-3s. So where can you get them from? We said oily fish 2 or 3 times a week. Algae supplements, but even things like flaxseed, milled flax, chia seeds, they're all high in the ALA, really high in ALA, and even walnuts, good old-fashioned walnuts. Nice. And there are lots of small levels of omega-3s in loads of plant foods, tiny amounts, but if you have a plant-rich diet, by default they'll build up. Yeah. So there's quite a lot there, Nick, that I've said on that bit. I realize there's 2 more on the fats I haven't spoken about yet, but has that bit clear? Because I think I've 100%, a lot better. Okay, yeah. Okay, so the other 2 won't talk too much about. So I mentioned MCTs. Mm-hmm. The reason why I spoke about triglycerides early on was because MCT stands for medium chain triglycerides.
Okay.
Now, these are slightly different because essentially they are types of saturated fat. From a chemistry perspective, no double bonds, they are completely saturated.
Yeah.
But the body treats them slightly differently. They're slightly less energy dense, whereas we generally say the calories from fat are about 9 per gram. MCT is 8.3.
Okay.
Don't worry too much about that. By the way, your food label will still say it's 9.
Right.
Because that's just the way of calorie counting. Another topic for another day.
Yeah.
Calorie counting. Okay. But so coconut oil and palm oil are both rich sources of MCTs. Coconut, plenty of. Palm oil is a bit demonized because of the sustainability side and everything. Palm oil is a bit demonized these days because of the sustainability and, deforestation and orangutans and everything like that. But there are sustainably sourced palm oil. But let's just park that. But coconut oil, we have lots of it. Some people cook with it. Have you noticed it ever? Have you bought coconut oil? It's solid at room temperature, which is because it's saturated. So the good thing about coconut oil is you can reuse it again and again. You don't have to waste it. You don't have to throw it away. You can reuse it, and it's not going to become oxidized. Now, why MCTs are interesting is they're a really good source of fuel. So long distance cyclists will supplement with them, especially because they're light, energy dense. Carbohydrates are only 4 calories per gram. These are 8.3, so over twice as energy dense. And they're a great source of fuel because the body absorbs and uses them much more efficiently than long chain triglycerides, standard fats.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Don't worry too much about them. I wouldn't want people to go away and start worrying about how much MCTs having, but just something to be aware of.
Yeah.
Trans fats, they're the last one. You mentioned these. But this is one thing that everybody, wherever they sit in the nutrition space, agrees from you. The trans fats are the ones we shouldn't be having. So I'm going to break my own rule here. I'm going to demonize them.
Right, okay.
But I don't get any objection from anywhere, wherever they sit on the nutrition space here.
Right.
We shouldn't be having trans fats. Now, why were we having them? Okay, because back in the 40s or whatever it was, back in the 1940s, people developed hydrogenated fats. Okay, and this was where people were having butter before, which is largely saturated fat, and that's solid at room temperature. But if you put it in your fridge, it's a nightmare putting on your bread, and it rips your bread apart.
Yeah.
So someone thought about using different types of fats and making them hydrogenated, which is trans fats, and they became spreadable from the fridge. Okay. Also, they were very cheap to produce, very energy dense. There was a time where
it's convenience.
Yeah, it was convenience, but also energy dense and cheap. With the time post-war, freedom America was growing. And it wasn't until 20 years later when people we were told to have more of them. They were told they were good for them.
Wow.
And then, of course, everybody started, increased risk of heart disease. Legislation has come across now on both sides of the Atlantic where more or less now you very, very seldom see them. Now, there are some naturally occurring trans fats, some in milk, for instance. Incidentally, have you ever seen the bodybuilding or sports supplement CLA?
Yep. That
is a trans fat. Okay, people don't realize it. It's a naturally occurring trans fat, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying it's a worthwhile supplement. That's another topic of conversation, but there's nothing wrong with it, certainly. But I'm just trying to give an example of there are naturally occurring trans fats.
Yeah.
The majority that we did see in our food are nearly gone, and there's no need for them in our diet. So do avoid trans fats. We don't have the European labelling regulations doesn't mandate that we show them, although some companies opt to. The American legislation does mandate, but usually if it says less than 1 or less than 0.1, whatever it is, that's pretty much fine. But you really, should be keeping them to an absolute minimum because they are atherogenic, will contribute to heart disease.
Yeah.
So that's covered the main areas of fats there. Is there any more questions on fats?
No, I've got to be honest with you. The bit with the omega-6 and the omega-3, that's the main bit I've taken from this.
Okay. Which is the most important bit.
And the trans fats, if I'm honest with you, is kind of new. Okay, I'm meant to avoid this, but now it's interesting knowing where it's come from and its reason for being there.
Yeah.
But the 6 and the 3, so would it be worth getting 3 and 6 through supplements if I'm not getting it in food?
I think 3 is definitely. 6 is no, because you will be getting it from your food.
Right.
You'll be getting plenty of 6s, but linoleic acid, although it's essential, people are getting plenty of it.
Brilliant.
Okay.
But that's covered it for me, James.
I think the omega-3 supplements you can get, vegan ones are available. Derived from algae.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So Next question. So I said to you I was going to be a bit of a dum-dum. And here it is. I hear a lot of people say avoid processed foods.
Okay.
So here's my question.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the question that I don't like, what's that about? But secondly, what is this process?
Okay.
Processed food. Are they all going through a similar process? What is it? What does it mean, processed food?
Okay. That's a brilliant question. What is processed food?
Mm.
Let me give you, I'm going to have to rewind and give you a little bit one of my history lessons again here. Okay. Well, foods have been processed for, I reckon, about 400,000 years, maybe 300,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the daily manipulation of fire started. And probably the lower end of that is when humans, former Homo, of our genus Homo, were applying heat to food to cook it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's not what people mean though when I say food processing.
No.
Okay. But even let's go back to maybe 30,000 years when there's evidence of milling.
Yep.
I.e. rubbing cereals between two stones
yep.
and some sort of flour came out. There was evidence of that.
Mm-hmm.
Been found in caves. So it's really useful. So anything that's, when you're not eating food in its form, just plucked out of the ground or taken from the animal, is really a process.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't mean
No.
that, like I've said, when they mean process.
Yeah.
What do they mean? Well, it's a bit nuanced and I don't really know. So I think it was in the late noughties. So I can't remember the name of the professor, but someone from the University of Sao Paulo came up with this definition. And he first used, there's in the records, I believe this was the first use of the term ultra processed food.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I believe it was in 2011 when the team at Sao Paulo University formalized this into a paper that they called the NOVA classification. Now, a lot of people, if they're listening, will have heard of NOVA, but let me just break it down for those that haven't. I have a real problem with it, by the way.
Okay.
There are 4 classes with NOVA. There are the class 1 is the foods in their raw form, so your meat, your fish, your vegetables out of the ground. You know, you can cook them, but no more than that, basically. Mm-hmm. Class 2 is the things you add to group 1 to make them more enjoyable or part of the culinary experience. So maybe salt, maybe sugar, maybe some other condiments, spices, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And these may probably be naturally occurring in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
Level 3 is minimally processed food. So the sort of things that people have been processing food for hundreds of years. Okay. And it's generally thought that anything that's in group 3, you could do in your kitchen. So you make bread, for instance.
Yeah.
Bread rolls. They've even allowed, where it suits them, to the bleaching of flour for white flour, stuff like that. So it's minimally processed. Now, like 4 is anything that they call ultra processed foods. It's any food that you couldn't use basic kitchen ingredients in order to process. So on the level, that's fine.
Yep.
But it's what follows from that. Mm-hmm. So people want to classify that, and there's a lot wrong with it. That was a brilliant paper written last year, published in one of the Nutrition Society journals. I think I've got 3 journals. It was in one of them. And it was very critical of NOVA. And I thought it was a very interesting piece. In fact, in one sentence, I even saw the authors of this paper accuse the NOVA authors of being ideological in their classification about it. Now, so that's what people mean by processed food.
Yes.
Okay. Does that answer that bit of your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That's a process. So a process is anything done to a food, and then there's the sort of the basics of what one can do in the kitchen to process, which people have been doing for hundreds of years, and nothing wrong with that. Of course not. Makes food enjoyable, makes it edible. And there's the ultra process, which is where I think people have an issue. But it's not good enough for me, ultra processed food, because the term ultra processed food is not good enough for me.
Okay.
Because it's a generalization. It's a sweeping generalization. It says nothing about the nutrient content of that food. Mm-hmm. Now, if, for instance, a bread was to be, when our great-grandparents made bread, it would have to be eaten that day. It would just go stale. It would be inedible.
Yep.
Right. Then, of course, we can add certain things to it, like some other oils, that extend its shelf life. Now, this is brilliant. This is one of the things modern food technology has given to the world that's taken food to those that can't get it. Mm-hmm. You know, it's allowed There's to be 8 billion people today.
Yep.
And there's no need for anyone on earth today to be undernourished.
Absolutely.
There is, because of things of war and politics and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
but either due to food distribution
Mm-hmm.
or to quantity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we couldn't have said that even in our younger days.
Yep.
This is 30 years this is like come about. And that is brilliant. And that is partly down, amongst other technologies, due to the ultra processing of food.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there are other reasons for ultra processed food, because it makes food more palatable, more enjoyable, makes it more visual. We can do so much with it. And that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of the data is looking at ultra processed foods and incidence of disease, and I've seen a correlation between people consuming too much ultra processed food and increasing metabolic disease, heart disease, maybe some cancers, Alzheimer's disease, etc., etc. Okay, that's really interesting and really useful. We definitely shouldn't be having too many of the wrong sorts of ultra processed food. But that's my point. They don't look about what the types of ultra processed food are.
Yes.
Now, the minute you fortify one of these standard processed foods with vitamins and minerals as well, then it becomes ultra processed by definition. And what's wrong with that? Because if we've lost the nutrition, you can say, well, we shouldn't have lost the nutrition due to farming technologies and stuff like that. Well, we shouldn't have done. I agree, but we have.
Yeah,
we have.
Yeah.
So you can say we shouldn't have done that. And you should be, I could talk about them. It's not an area I'm an expert in. But I've got a skimming of knowledge on the modern farming techniques and where they've gone wrong and what we should be doing to change that. And a lot of farmers are on board with the term regenerative farming, which wasn't even a term, 50 years ago. So it's only back then regenerative farming was just called farming. but it's we now need this thing but that's a whole different topic, and there is nutrients being lost because it's lost from the soil and it's in our food system, and some of the way the hybrid of cereals are produced, they're not so nutrient dense, they're just as nutrient dense in respect of carbohydrates and energy, but lost some of the micronutrients. And we can say you should be getting it all from your food, but we're not. And we could be saying that people should be eating, take away all that side of it. We could say people should be making good food choices. They should be eating more fruit and veg, and they should be eating the right sort of cereals and the right proteins, but they're not.
Yeah.
So we can be all privileged and idealistic we want and demonize ultra processed foods and say people shouldn't be having them. But certain ultra processed foods are very advantageous. Okay.
It's very clever. If you don't mind me saying, this is a very clever system for you layperson like me, that all I hear is processed. Now, to hear you saying, well, actually, if I get some meat, if you like, and then I'm adding vitamins and different minerals to that's then considered processed food.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't happen so much with meat, but I get your example.
Yeah,
it happens a lot with cereals.
Right. Yeah. So that's my example, but I've been told avoid.
Yeah.
But here's the nuance. What you're explaining now, which is there's some really crappy processed food,
and the majority of the and let's call them ultra processed food as well. For that, the majority of ultra processed foods that people have are crappy. Now, I use the term junk food, and people say we shouldn't be doing that. Have you heard earlier in our conversations how many times I use the word junk food? Because there is no good term. I get it. I can see why people want to use the term ultra processed food, but as a term, it's not good enough.
Right.
Okay. Junk food is also not good enough, but I feel it's slightly better. Now I'm trying to come up with my own terminology. There's the HFSS term that's being used, which stands for high fat, sugar, salt, and that's being used for regulatory. Well, maybe there's something in it that you combine ultra processed HFSS and a couple of other bits, and then maybe we've got the things that people should be avoiding. That's going to be a really hard nutrition message to put out. I get it. I get why people are saying have less ultra processed foods, because the objective evidence, and what a big fan I am of that, is saying this is causing problems. But it's too simplistic. It's too generalistic. And as we all know, life is never simple. So, and I haven't even gone down, as you know, sustainable nutrition is a very important thing that I try and talk a lot about, right?
Yeah.
There's 8 billion people on the planet, right? We need ultra processed foods. We're trying to get people to consume less meat because of its impact on climate change. And so these companies that have produced these meat alternatives based on pea protein or soy protein or everything, they're making meat alternative products out of plants, which are by definition ultra processed. Great. Some of them taste lovely. Some of them don't taste so great, but people are experimenting with them, and people could say, James, you've got a bias here because because of the company I'm associated with. And if you follow the NOVA definition and our products are ultra processed, maybe I have got a bias, but tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It's a lot clearer to me. Because before this conversation, I'm being honest with you, mine was a ready meal. That's processed food.
Okay.
A ready meal is a processed food. And it's because obviously some of the work that I do around the people, they just go for convenience, buy this, and that's what they're. And then I do look at these guys and they are not healthy. So for me, before this conversation, if I'm honest with you, I just took processed food as those ready meals. And that was kind of it.
Well, and if that is, and a lot of those ready meals aren't so good. And if you are avoiding, I mean, there are some ready meals that are probably okay, so I don't want to demonise them.
No.
But it's a generalised term again.
So the one thing I want to kind of, the one thing I want to say here is, I tell you what's come out of this whole conversation for me and you, all of these different bits that we spoke about. What I'm trying to express is the bit that I've got out from this, talking about the sugars, the fats, and this process. Like I just said, I didn't realize that ultra processed food could be healthy. I didn't realize that. That's something that wasn't even on the table. Now, I think that as lay people, we're getting bombarded with spin doctors. We're getting experts that are kind of just playing with words and chucking it out there, to the point that I remember speaking to somebody else. It wasn't to you about this, but it's almost like me and you. And I'm saying this is happening, but this is how fearful I am of some of the information that's out there. Imagine you and me and sitting here now, and we make a patty and it's full of potato and onion. Okay, and now I've got a pea-sized worth of beef, 100%. It's almost like I'm putting that in the patty and going, 100% beef in there, and selling it. And that's how scared I am of this stuff. So to hear you say there's nuance and we have to look at this, the omega-3 and omega-6, the one thing I'm going to do when I leave here is I'm going to have a look at my omega-3s. That's the one thing I'm going to do from here. The bit to do with sugars, that's fascinating for me. Okay. Because as far as I was concerned, okay, well, if I want to lose weight, I need to avoid fruit, because this is what these guys are saying. No, I've never seen a fat fruitarian. Of course I haven't. Super healthy from what I understand, from what they're telling me. There was one that used to go to a gym that we used to belong to, and there was one there.
What, fruitarian?
Yeah.
I just want to put a marker on that. Fruitarianism is highly dangerous. And there was that very case, I think it was 1st of August, that influencer that died. It was on a lot of press about her. A very sad case. She was a fruitarian influencer. So, fruitarianism, no. I'm just saying, having fruit as part of a vegetarian, vegan diet.
Yep.
Brilliant.
And this is this is the point I'm making. This is why I'm glad that we've had this conversation, because the whole thing is, it's about asking these questions. And this is why I know that you care. From me and you, knowing you personally, I know that you care that people get real information. I know that it means a lot to you personally, and I think that's sometimes why you get frustrated, is because it feels like you're fighting against so much bad information. And then on top of that, you've got people like me that just don't understand this stuff. And we're trying to, but then we're trying to just get on with our world.
That's great. Yeah, 'cause only recently have I been trying to do these videos for social media. This came from a conversation I had with a very respected nutritionist friend of mine about 18 months ago, when I was moaning and ranting about the misinformation from there. And she said to me, well, that's partly on us, James. We don't do it.
Yep.
And she had a point, so I made a goal that's part of what I'm going to do. Now, as you know, I do a lot of nutrition writing. Part of that's to formulate my ideas, and people don't read articles. Why should they? People don't have the time to do it. They don't have the capacity to take it in. I get that. So I do it, and I publish the articles for the few who do want to read them. Hopefully they enjoy them. But the majority of people aren't. So you need to do the video content. And like you say, there's so much rubbish video content out there. But there's also some really good influencers.
Yeah.
And it's confusing. How do you discern what the good and the bad? This is the thing. So these are the watch outs. So maybe I'll just summarize the watch outs. We mentioned earlier that watch out for an influencer or a content maker that's very likely not giving good advice is they will talk in absolutes. Don't have this, have that. If you have this, you will do this. Science is nuanced, it's complicated, there's so much more to it. So a good influencer will say something like, try and cut down on this. Maybe not have too much of that. Occasionally is fine. Right? Or try and, be more realistic in what they say. Another one is that they will demonize certain foods, which we discussed. Maybe seed oils are bad, fruit's bad, bread's bad, water's bad, air's bad. Okay, air is bad. It contributes to oxidation. Why would you want that, right? Oxygen causes oxidation. I don't want that oxygen stuff. If you take it to the extreme, that's where you're going.
Yeah.
Okay. So, whereas a good content maker would say, try and cut
please
down
edit that. Please edit that. Just James is saying oxygen bad. sorry, James.
In fact, it's a good example. Right?
Yeah.
There's a good content maker would say, try and cut down on this food. Don't have it too often, right? Maybe don't make this the bulk of your diet. Another watch out is they'll say the truth about this. This is highly conspiratorial thinking.
Yeah.
It's or fact. They'll say fact after a very good friend of ours uses this in a lot of his videos. Anyone listening, you'll probably guess who we're talking about. It's uses fact in a lot of when he lists things. Things aren't fact. That's not the way science works. The truth, like you're uncovering some great big conspiracy or something like that. It doesn't really, it doesn't work like that. Okay. What is the truth about certain things? Well, we're still trying to find that out. And maybe we never will.
You and I have some beautiful conversations around that word.
Yeah. So it's complex and complicated.
I love it.
And there are, other watch outs. Well, clickbaity. Unfortunately, a lot of the good influencers also have to occasionally use some clickbait purely for the reasons they want to get their content going.
James, I'm going to be honest with you. Do you know the one thing that I think would be really good? And I don't know about the social media stuff, but the one thing that I think would really be good is almost like I think you'd suit the part actually. Like back in the day, there was a Deirdre.
I remember that.
I think you should be that for food.
Okay.
And just allow people to kind of, okay, James, here's my question.
If people want,
I think that would be.
If people want to ask me questions, they can, and they can send them in, and I can read them out. And they call it AMAs these days, don't they? Ask me anything. So
yeah, be careful of that. I've got some questions for you that are definitely food unrelated.
Okay, ask me AMAON. Ask me anything on nutrition.
Yeah.
Okay. If I found anything else you want to cover on that area?
No, because I know you and I, we could do this until tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So, and there's so much information there. I couldn't take in any more today. That's more than enough for me.
Okay.
The process bit to me, that's the bit that's shocked me.
Okay.
In a really positive way, but it's the bit that shocked me.
Okay.
But again, it's knowing, as you're saying, it's nuanced. Everything is nuanced here. I
think what people might want to know on the food process, how do they know what food they should be not having so often? What's ultra-processed food? And I'm going to end up on this one. Nutrition science is not rocket science. It's actually not that hard.
Right.
We all know what foods we probably should or shouldn't be having so often. We all know, really. Okay, it's a bit more complicated than some get through. There are some clever marketing terms that are used and they dress things up that perhaps the way they shouldn't be. But by and large, you should be having more foods in their more natural form or minimally processed. But having some ultra-processed foods occasionally, even some junk food occasionally, is absolutely fine. And some ultra-processed foods can be beneficial.
Yep.
The environmental benefits, like I've illustrated.
Yep.
And numerous other benefits.
And health benefits. Yeah. So,
the main thing I've taken that reminds me of, again, because I'm privileged that you and I are able to sit down when we tolerate each other. The bit that you and I sit down, I'm in that privileged position, but the one thing it reminds me of, these conversations here, to do with the sugars, to do with the fats, and I've got to say, to do this process bit has really, that's the big bit that's opened my eyes today. But the other thing is, and I'm not blowing smoke up your backside here, the one bit that I would love people to understand about you is you really give a damn about getting this. And I'm asking you not to say anything at this point, just for this moment. I know that you care about, you want this information to be out there. The one thing that your lay person like me has got is this, it's almost like we're being bombarded with, I'm saying it, you're not saying this. It feels like we're being bombarded with spin doctors, absolute spin doctors that are saying, this is really good for you, this is really bad for you, full stop, easy, there you go. And when you do the tiniest bit of digging, process, I didn't know that ultra-processed foods could be very healthy. Could be. And obviously there's a lot of processed foods and ultra-processed foods that are not healthy.
Okay.
James, I've enjoyed this.
Thank you for this, and we'll do it again.
Yep.
Thank you.
Cheers.